Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Horse Geeks podcast, where we look at horses and riding from the inside out. I'm Kirsten Nelsen, professional horse trainer, and with me is the lovely Deb Romero, certified Alexander Technique instructor. So today's topic is self-carriage. We'll look at what that means. It's a horse terminology, so we'll look at what that means regarding horses' movement, but also take a look at what that means related to riders or even related to our own use when we're off the horse. And, this is a term. The term self-carriage gets thrown around a lot in the horse business, but rarely do we sort of really think it through and dissect what that means on a practical level, day to day with our horses.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? So today I wanted to really look at what does self-carriage mean from the inside out. And I mean, the first most obvious thing is self-carriage is also descriptive of what we're looking for. It's descriptive of the action, which means the horse carries itself. So we can apply the same term to people. And as a body worker with people, what would you say self-carriage is for a person, whether they're riding or not riding?
I guess what really comes to mind is there can be good self-carriage and poor self-carriage. It's our relationship with internal and external forces and how we manage them in the most eloquent way we possibly can with the least amount of effort.
Right. So just like there's different terms for balance, like one definition of balance is the ability to not fall over.
Yeah.
Right. I go, okay, that's a rudimentary level of balance. Yes. Just like you're saying, there's a rudimentary level of self-carriage where we manage to move our bodies around with some efficiency, get stuff done, not fall over, and not rely on external objects such as crutches, braces, walkers, right? When we have to use a tool just to manage our own body, then that's kind of the most obvious version of losing self-carriage.
Good point.
Right? Which is what can happen to people as we age and just assume we're going to need a walker as we age. That's
a big assumption. Yeah.
Right. That we're going to need help. We're going to need a cane or we're going to need a walker and if we're injured and we need crutches or we need braces, it's like, okay, that temporary external support can help us reestablish our self-carriage, or we can become reliant on it. And
it's even like you think after some sort of body trauma that you're completely back to normal, but your brain has actually established a new normal.
And that's how we can become dependent on things like walkers.
Yes.
Right. And it's very much the same with horses. I go, when we're sort of mixing up the terms of rein contact with rein aids, what can happen is the more and more the horse sort of doesn't control their own body weight and instead increases pressure on the bit, needing kind of a heavy rein, then that's the antithesis of self-carriage. Right? And it's not an uncommon belief that a rein contact means we have to use effort with the reins to prevent the horse from falling forward.
Wow.
And that's like giving a horse a walker. It's like saying, here, lean on my hands instead of controlling your own body weight during motion. Right? So the self-control that the horse develops, pushing forward, but also resisting their body weight from falling excessively to their front legs, is part of self-carriage. So anytime we have to go to a leveraged bit or we need a lot of rein pressure to prevent the horse from falling forward, then that in itself should alert us that our horse lacks self-carriage.
Yes.
And a lot of people think that's how you gain self-carriage. And I go, not so much. As long as the horse is leaning on the rider's arms in a way that makes us sort of have to use a lot of upper body strength or use a lot of muscular energy just to stabilize ourselves in the saddle, that amount of force through our arms to our upper body tells us the horse is not in self-carriage, is not controlling their own body during motion.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I see this vision of, it's almost like the habit of the human is always to contract and bring something closer to their body, especially with their arms. So it sounds to me like it almost becomes a tug of war.
It becomes just like the physics of water skiing, right? The boat pulls forward and we lean back. And it's like that sort of opposite directions of force can create stability. It's not an independent balance of the person, right? It's a person leaning against a forward force that creates the stability. So when we ride and we talk about self-carriage, it should be more like two really good dancers dancing together. Each one independently has self-control over their body and knows their steps. And then they work in harmony with each other, not counterbalancing on each other.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. And that's what self-carriage of the rider and self-carriage of the horse should feel like. The horse is independent in carrying their own body weight, controlling direction, controlling stability, I should say, during directional changes, like a dance. You're changing direction, you're maybe altering speed and tempo, but the one dancer is not held up by the other. One dancer is not leaning on the other dancer.
Yes.
Right. And even though the lead in a human dancing partnership, the man is usually the lead, the woman is the follow. So in that relationship, the man guides the direction of motion and keeps the rhythm and guides the woman into the dance steps or to dance in harmony. And when we ride, the rider is like the lead of the dance and the horse is more like the follower, but both bodies have to be controlled enough that it's not a relationship of opposing forces.
Right.
And that to me is the essence of the definition of self-carriage. So I go, the other thing we do as riders is we constantly push the horse forward with our seat or our legs, our spurs, our whip. And we want more speed or more energy. So again, when we're driving a horse forward, then does the horse have self-propelled forward or self-controlled forward energy? No, because we're using force to elicit more and more, which means, or support the reduction of speed, right? So we're resisting any reduction of speed, which means as soon as we take our legs off or get our seat quiet, the horse quits moving forward.
Yes.
Right. So if we just go from a leg aid to a leg contact, and that's enough to get our horse to stop, or if we just release our moving driving seat and we stabilize our pelvis and the horse quits going forward, then that also tells us the horse has no self-carriage. Right? What we're doing is creating a driving forward force. And in reality, the horse is sort of leaning against that, waiting for us to stop because the mind is in a backwards mode.
Yeah.
Which means the body is not authentically pushing. We're creating that. So where is the self-carriage? If we're constantly using leg aids, spurs, whips, driving with our seat, or using the leverage of the reins or the bit to hold a horse up, none of that is self-carriage in the horse. It means
Yes.
the horse lacks self-carriage.
Yeah. Or is it another word called, I don't know why this came to mind. It's a hunter thing, framing, putting a horse in a frame.
Right. So we can use our aids to resist imbalances. We do that all the time. The problem comes in that an aid is where we're increasing resistance or creating resistance through our body to get the horse to change direction or speed up or slow down. But it's in the release of our aid when we come back to being a neutral rider, which is what our contacts are. So a leg contact feels what the horse is doing, but we don't tense our muscles or increase the force of our legs. We just receive the information through a contact. So whether it's our seat, our legs, or our reins, when we're receiving rather than influencing, we're in a contact.
Yes.
As soon as we start using effort, muscular energy, moving our bones around, we're now giving an aid. So even when the horse wants to push on the bit and we resist with the reins, that becomes an aid.
Yes.
Right. So as the forces on the reins increase, that means we're shifting from a rein contact into a rein aid.
So would you say contact is more, I think you used the word listening. You're just receiving information.
Yeah. If we think of aids and contacts, I think we've talked about this before in a podcast. The contact is where we receive tactile information. We're not trying to influence anything. We're just receiving the feel through the reins, through our seat, through our legs, and we're neutral. And then an aid is when we increase our energy or make a change in how we're using our body that alters the force and influences the horse. That becomes an aid. So in our, like if I go back to sort of a dancing with a partner, right? If the lead of the dance is sort of gently pressing on the follower's shoulder, sort of saying like guiding with the hand in a leftward direction, that's an aid. Right? So during a dance, there's constant aids, and then there's brief moments of contact. Right? So every time the lead of the dance gives the follower of the dance some guidance, those are aids. And when they're just holding hands or arms around each other connected, that's a contact. And it's invisible. It's just a change of force between a neutral touch and an active direction. Those are contacts and aids.
What's unique in that situation is if both dancers are not in self-carriage, it wouldn't work.
Oh, it gets ugly. It can kind of work, but it's not pretty. Yeah. We've all seen that.
That would be me.
It's just awkward and people step on each other's toes and blame each other. It's no different than the horse rider relationship. So self-carriage for the rider is learning how to stabilize our axial skeleton, how to stabilize our skeleton over the forces of motion, really in line with gravity more than the horse. And that's where we can have a neutral hand-holding, touching relationship with the horse.
Yes.
And it's during the moments of true contact that we feel if the horse has self-carriage or doesn't, or how good the horse's self-carriage is or how poor. Right? Yes. Because if we release rein pressure and try to just have a hand holding contact through our reins, and the horse keeps increasing the pressure on the reins, then we know, or if we have to like release the rein length and make it longer and longer and longer just to maintain a hand holding feel, then we know the horse is falling forward and they don't have self-carriage, or control over their own body weight during motion, right? So if we're always holding the rein length and we're just sort of coping with heavy or increasing forces on our arms and upper body, then we're not necessarily getting the horse into self-carriage. We're just becoming the walker that the horse leans on in order to keep moving.
Yeah, and I also think when we're giving an aid, is it possible to still be listening? You know what I mean? When we have the thought in our head that we need to be doing something.
Yeah, and I think it's impossible to do both at the same moment.
Yeah.
But the transition between the two can be incredibly rapid. Like we don't really see dancers giving aids and contacts. It's invisible.
Yeah.
It's slight changes of force between the two bodies that are the aids, but they're with two really good dancers. Those changes of force are so minimal that they're almost imperceptible to the observer. And that's what happens between a good horse and good rider is that transition between a contact and an aid can be very rapid and very subtle. And the more the horse and the rider are actually authentically in self-carriage, the more that sort of transition between feeling and giving feel happens at a very subtle, rapid level.
Yeah, I like that. Subtle and rapid. That's what it feels like.
Mm-hmm. So when we have these huge leg aids, where we're obviously sort of like flapping our lower leg bones, kicking, or pointing our toes out to use a spur, right? Or having to constantly tap with a whip, or having to really use some muscular effort to deal with the rein contact. All of those things tell us that the horse is not in self-carriage. So the longer we perpetuate the aid, the worse the horse's self-carriage becomes. It doesn't become better. We just become the crutch.
Yeah,
the
they become dependent on that.
Right.
Or numb to it. You know, I see the leg flapping as they pretty much have to become numb to that.
Yes. Yeah, or the constant driving seat.
Yeah.
It's like all that motion in the rider's seat is going to cause the horse to contract their back muscles excessively because it's a moving, unstable force in the saddle. There's no other way they can cope with it other than excessively contracting the back muscles. So ironically, the more we drive them forward with the seat, the less comfortable forward actually becomes for the horse. So we work against correct use of the spine and the back muscles of the horse, which takes the horse farther and farther away from developing self-carriage. We impede their self-carriage.
Yes.
Right? So the way we test the self-carriage in the horse is after each aid, we restore a neutral contact. And if we've kind of jumbled the two up and we've just gotten used to riding a horse that's heavy on the reins or a horse that we have to drive and kick all the time, then we might need to give ourselves some space, some time between an aid and a contact. Right? So I like using ways of quantifying sort of the response of the horse. So for example, if we give a leg aid and we start counting, a horse that doesn't have a strong pushing mechanism, which is part of their self-carriage, we might put our light leg aid on and have to count to 10 before the horse takes one lethargic step, right? That tells us that the horse doesn't have self-control over the pushing or accelerating forces that they use in their body. So if it takes us to the count of 10 to get a few steps forward, and then we go back to a neutral leg contact, we release the aid, and the horse instantly stops by the count of one, right? Then we know we don't have self-carriage. And we have to help the horse dynamically build more pushing capacity in order to move towards self-carriage. Right. And the same is true with our rein aids and our rein contact, or a horse that rushes. So a horse that rushes has very little control over their braking mechanism or control over their own body weight during forward motion. So if the reins get heavy and we just drop the reins and release that resistance, does the horse go faster and faster out of control?
Hopefully not.
Right? Some do.
Some do.
Which means that they have such little control over their own body weight that they have to use a bit of momentum just to kind of find stability. So that's when our rein aids are not developing self-carriage, but they're just sort of holding the horse up while they're falling forward.
Oh, I see that. Yeah, that makes total sense.
Right. So on that type of horse, if we played with a halt aid using our seat, our back, and our reins to get from a walk to a halt, we might find the opposite with if we count. So instead of it might take a 1 to get the horse going, we might count to 1 and the horse is already gone in the walk or trot or faster. But when we ask the horse to stop, we may have to keep increasing the rein pressure to the count of 10 or higher just to get the horse to halt. So again, that imbalance in the aids for going and woeing tells us that the horse has issues with either the pushing mechanism or the braking and control mechanism that how they carry their bodies during motion is weak.
Yeah, I think I've even seen it, correct me if I'm wrong, but horses that, for instance, won't even stand at the mounting block. It's like they're falling forward when you get on, or even just standing there, holding a horse, that they keep creeping forward.
Yes. And a lot of times,
are those good signs that we're not in, we can't even, the horse can't even be neutral?
Right. And some of that can be emotionally based. Some of it can be anxiety, right? Or a negative anticipation of being ridden. So, we might just need to stand there and let the horse calm down a little bit. Because maintaining a halt that is a speed, right?
Yeah.
So if the horse has no self-carriage at halt and can't maintain halt, then that's just going to become a bigger and bigger problem as we go into motion.
Yeah.
Right. So we can think of self-carriage as maintaining a gait, which halt is a gait. We have halt, walk, trot, canter, gallop. And any one of those different gaits, there can be a rhythm, a speed, a stride length where the horse has control or loses self-control over the speed, the stride length, the tempo, something like that, where they either lose control of their body weight or they're not self-propelled going forward. Right? So even horses that are hard to steer, if we can't turn a horse with their neck straight and we have to really pull the rein or bend the neck, then that's also another alert to us that they don't have self-carriage in changes of direction, that they're either falling forward, slowing down too much, speeding up too much, or getting sort of overly bent through their spine, or maybe even falling in, falling out, kind of rolling side to side. So all of those issues that we try to constantly control through aids, they're all issues of self-carriage.
Right.
Right. So until we release the aid and the horse can lightly follow our guidance, we just need to know that we don't have self-carriage. And that's what we have to improve.
Yes. I've always been perplexed by the adding of more gadgets to make it work.
Yeah, because it's sort of human nature. It's just like we do for ourselves. You know, we buy different gadgets to make us sit up straight. We buy walkers so that we can keep functioning once we completely lose our own self-carriage. You know, we do all we are gadget oriented, thinking that if we give ourselves support, then somehow we will develop self-carriage. But even if we use support, the support is like getting an aid.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, our self-carriage means that we're no longer reliant on the aid in order to function, that we become independent of the aid. That's what self-carriage is, independence.
Yes.
Right? It doesn't mean you can't guide.
Right.
You can guide direction, you can guide speed, but within that guidance, how hard we're working or what we're relying on is the difference between self-carriage or a complete lack of self-carriage.
Yeah. Because it's a very intrinsic thing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's very internal. It's not, people think that balancing is, you know, using your arms or whatever to balance you, but really it's a very internal thing.
Right. And so, like for humans, if we take away the support of a gadget or a tool, then do we fall forward? Can we function? On a horse, it's a little more subtle because a quadruped can have excessive weight on the front legs, which is technically falling forward, but we don't always see them stumble or fall. Instead, what we get are either sort of behavioral issues or over time lameness issues.
Right.
Right. So the horse isn't as obvious when they lose self-carriage and fall forward because they've got four legs to sort of rely on. But the weight in our reins tells us when they're falling forward. Their lack of propulsion tells us they're not well organized or they don't carry themselves forward in a comfortable way. So those signs tell us what we need to work on. Right. So self-carriage is not the result. How do I say this? It's not the result of, you know, just doing X number of dance steps, which are kind of our exercises and our maneuvers. It's like you can put, when you learn to dance, I think some studios will put footprints on the ground, right?
That makes sense.
Follow these footprints. But the difference between a good dancer and a bad dancer is like what you're saying, that internal coordination and self-carriage doing the very same steps.
It's almost, you go into the periphery. You know, it's such an internal thing, you don't see it. You have to kinesthetically feel it.
Yes.
In a human anyway.
And the way we feel that in our horses is the difference between a completely neutral contact and an aid becomes a very minuscule amount of force, right? It's a very subtle change in our muscle tone and use. It's not go to the gym and build up your upper body strength so you can ride your horse, right? Like that. I've heard that so many times, that this is a man's horse. This is a big, heavy bodied horse. And when somebody tells me this is a man's horse, what I know is it's going to require a lot of upper body strength to ride this horse, which means the horse has zero control over their own body weight during forward motion. Right. And so I've also heard people say, man, I need to go to the gym. Women will say this. I need to go to the gym and really develop my upper body strength to ride my horse more effectively. And I just go, that's just the wrong track. Right? If you look at dancers, the male dancer doesn't have to be any stronger or fitter than the female partner.
Exactly.
right? If they're going to dance really well in competition, they both have to be athletically fit and in self-carriage, right? If you're just kind of dancing for fun, you don't have to be incredibly athletically fit, but you can't go around leaning on your partner or dragging your partner around the dance floor. We do that too, right? Just like we ride that way, but it's not lovely or really a lot of fun because without self-carriage on both sides or both partners, it becomes literally kind of a drag. It's just,
Like a tug of war
yeah, yes,
or
like a tug of war.
micromanaging, trying to, take care of every little corner. I used to ride that way and my horses would blow up.
Yeah, and I think there's a certain amount of pride. I think there's a certain amount of sort of pride or esteem that riders have when they really work hard to manage a horse and get the maneuver accomplished. Do you know what I mean? That the
Yeah, that's the
harder,
doing of it all. That's the thought that it has to be difficult. I have to use effort,
and a lot of leverage
a lot of leverage,
yeah,
a lot of leg,
and
I
really
hear
be
that.
busy and
Busy,
yeah,
yes.
and that the
Busy with our
harder,
hands, especially.
yes, or the thought that the harder we work, the better we ride. And I go, the harder we work, the more we take away the job of self-carriage from the horse.
I agree.
And if we take away self-carriage from the horse, I'm sorry, but there is no human on the planet that can develop the internal coordination of balance and self-carriage in a horse better than the horse can do it for
I think
itself.
that's really important.
Yeah. So as much as we learn about biomechanics or force management or all these different gadgets we have available, all these techniques and exercises and maneuvers, all of that is not going to make a horse develop that internal coordination of balance and self-carriage. The horse has to discover it for themselves ultimately.
And I
So,
think when they do, they really like it. I
oh
mean,
yeah,
it's like the human, after they've had several Alexander lessons, you begin to seek that inner self-carriage.
or even dancing. When we first learn to dance, whether it's waltz or with a partner, waltz or tango or whatever, it's not really fun until we find that coordination.
It's messy.
It's kind of awkward. We get frustrated. And that's how our horses feel.
It's how humans feel too.
Right. And I had the luxury one time of taking dance lessons with the instructor as my partner. And I just felt amazingly guided and stable while I was learning. Right. But he couldn't do it for me. I had to figure out how to follow. I had to figure out how to stay on my toes. I had to figure out all these different self-carriage parts of just being the follower to make the dance fun. And then
I
when
think
I would,
that's really important, because if he didn't have his own self-carriage,
he
you
couldn't
couldn't
have
have followed.
guided me.
No.
So it was kind of an eye-opening experience going, oh, I'm the horse. This is what the horse feels from the rider. And then I would go to group dance lessons where I would dance with beginner guys and I would get irritated and frustrated because I'm like, it doesn't have to be this way. Right. It doesn't have to be this way. And they would look at me and tell me, you need to get better. Quit doing this, this, and this. And I'm like, worry about yourself. Right.
We should tell that to most riders.
Right. And they just didn't understand as learning to be the leader of the dance, which is like learning to be a good rider. They didn't comprehend my perspective at the time. They didn't realize that their guidance wasn't clear, or that some of the forces that they were generating from their lack of self-carriage were affecting my balance and my self-carriage.
Yes.
And that's the deal between a horse and rider. It's like until we really learn independent balance, right? So our alignment with gravity is how we find balance that's independent of the moving horse.
I think that's really important because the horse is probably not in balance and we're probably not in balance either. But at least if we're focusing on balancing ourselves, that gives the horse permission to do the same thing.
Yes. And the more aids we give, the harder it becomes for us to maintain self-carriage.
Totally agree.
So if we're losing our own self-carriage and our own stability by giving a million aids all the time, then dynamically we're working counterproductively to the stability and balance of the horse.
Yes.
Because we're just generating all these forces all the time, and there's no place of stillness where the horse can even learn to carry itself. It's a constant reaction to ongoing forces.
Reaction. I like that. It's a reaction instead of an action.
Right. So instead of the dance looking smooth and feeling really fun and enjoyable, it gets kind of jerky and awkward and loses
it's following
the
the footsteps on the floor.
Yes. 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 And we can all humans can kind of recognize that, whether we know how to dance or not dance, even if we know how to ride or we don't ride.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's a lot of times it's so funny. The husbands will sort of show up for a lesson while the wife is riding, and they'll sort of look at the horse going, wow, should it be that much effort for the horse? And I go, no, no, it should not look that like it's that much effort for the horse. It should ultimately, a horse in self-carriage, there's a sense of grace and ease, just like a good dancer.
And the thought that keeps coming into my mind is, well, I know people do this, and do horses go in and out of self-carriage? It's not, I think it's important that it's not a place and you hold it, because that's just not a moving creature.
Right. I would say that's very true. Like, I'm sure you get asked all the time when people find kind of a new function or a new coordination in the use of their own body. And I've heard it when you've taught, how do I hold this?
Yeah.
How do I
get
this?
That?
How do,
Is this right?
Is this right? How do I keep it? How do I hold it? And that's not really, it's like balance, which is what develops self-carriage, is our internal coordination of balance. That's just a point in time, right? So we always have external forces, but how we manage our internal forces helps us find our balance moment after moment after moment after moment. And I laugh. I go, that would be like asking a sailor, how do I hold my sea legs? How do I maintain this position while the ocean is constantly moving? I go, it's a rebalancing. It's a constant adaptive adjustment, which ironically gives us quiet stillness and stability during the forces of motion. And so it's only when we release our aids and sort of feel that neutralness, just like if we're on a boat trying to get our sea legs, we have to feel, how are the forces affecting our bodies from the boat or the ocean in order to find our own equilibrium. Right? And with a dance partner or with a horse, we can't influence the ocean with how we use our body. You get your sea legs on whatever, or you don't. But when we have a partner, a dance partner, or our horse, how we use our bodies can influence the forces of motion in the other body.
Yes.
Right. That is very different than just getting your sea legs.
Yes.
Right. But self-carriage is like getting your sea legs. It's that independence of control over your body, no matter what the forces of the current or the ocean are kind of throwing at you.
Yes.
And while we're learning it, yes, we have to grab the rail. Yes, we fall over sometimes.
Yes.
You know, that's part of the learning process. And those are the aids.
Yes.
right? So if we lend our horse a handrail while they're learning to get their sea legs, that's the aid. But they don't, if they're constantly hanging on to the handrail, which is our aid, then they never get their sea legs. They never get that independent self-carriage.
Yeah, I compare it to, because I don't have a designated arena, and I notice a huge difference on the way I ride if I ride next to a fence line or if I don't.
Interesting. And so
Yeah,
what do you think the fence line is doing?
that's the aid.
Yes. Yes. It's an external support.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of horses can't track straight unless they're on a rail.
Interesting.
Mhm. Which is why in dressage, the test in dressage is all geometry, right? And all of those circles and transitions across the diagonal and moving, moving in different geometrical paths according to the letters as the sort of demarcations of the geometry that we're forming through a test. All of that is to test self-carriage, to challenge the balance and stability of the horse and the rider.
Yes.
Right? But doing the test is sort of like, okay, you can follow the footprints on the floor, but
Yeah,
that doesn't mean you can dance.
that's right.
And it certainly doesn't mean you're not leaning on a cane or a walker to get the job done. Right? And that's what happens a lot in dressage is we think if we can just get through that geometry of the test and make the transitions, even if the reins are 1,000,000 pounds, or we need a leveraged bit to control speed, or we're constantly kicking and pushing to maintain forward, right? Or we're really having to pull on the reins or bend the horse's neck to get a turn. All of those things tell us, okay, you're following the footprints, but you have no self-carriage in the horse.
Exactly. It's when we go into the getting the task done thinking instead of how we are getting the task done.
Right.
Yeah.
And getting the task done does not guarantee balance or self-carriage.
Exactly.
It's how we go through it, not what we
Yes.
do. And that, dressage was sort of developed as a way, as part of a training process to develop and challenge a horse's self-carriage, to gymnasticize them, to build not only self-control over their motion, but athletic agility,
Yes.
right? That's
It's
why
like, yeah, yeah. It's like
that's why,
availability. Am I available? Am I in a neutral body situation that I could use my body any way I needed to at any moment?
right. And I go, if you really understand that that is the essence of dressage, is to build self-carriage, build balance, build agility, build power, then you look at some of the current competitors and you go, that horse has to make a 3-point turn, right? Or that piaffe looks lethargic and labored, right? Or that horse couldn't survive a 3-foot fence, right? Couldn't gallop cross country, or a lot of times can't even be trusted to be turned out without injuring themselves.
Yeah,
I go, so what kind of athletic agility did we really develop if that's the condition of our dressage horse?
that's a good point.
I go, we missed the point. We just miss the point of dressage if our horse doesn't become more self-controlled, develop better self-carriage, and become more athletic and agile.
Yes.
Then we kind of miss the point. And dressage should be kind of a cornerstone of training, whether we want to jump, even if you wanted to improve racing horses or Western training. It's like if you don't have the basics in Western training and you try to go cut cattle, you're screwed. That horse isn't agile enough to
Right.
make sweeping turns left and right to keep up with a cow. There's no way, unless the horse is balanced in self-carriage and strong, do they become agile enough to do a reining pattern Well, reining patterns are much like dressage. It's just the Western version of developing athletic agility and power. But cow cutting and ranch working that's putting the work you've done in your foundation to the test.
Yes.
So same with jumping, whether it's cross country or stadium jumping, you're putting that agility to the test.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think it's a good phrase or a good word to dissect a little bit.
Mm.
And I can't tell you how many times I'll ask a rider, how many pounds of force or pressure is it taking on the reins to prevent your horse from falling forward, or to ask your horse for a downward transition or a halt? And if they sort of go, wow, it's a lot, this is a lot of work, I'll say, well, then how do you think your horse's self-carriage is? And it's like that fundamental idea that we all strive for in developing our horses through training gets really lost when we get into the weeds of how do we give an aid? How do we do a maneuver? Are we doing, how's our position? Blah, blah, blah. It's like everybody completely forgets that the
Yes.
goal is self-carriage in the horse. It's easy to forget. And it's like I get the wide eyes and the big, oh, touch of the forehead going, I guess my
What?
horse's self-carriage is not very good if it's taking that much force
Good point.
to slow the horse down, make a downward transition, or to ask the horse for more energy in the forward motion, right? In
Yeah.
both ways, or to steer the horse or ride the accurate geometrical patterns of a dressage test. I go, all of those challenges where we have to use more effort is what alerts us to the fact that our horse lacks self-carriage.
Mm-hmm.
So the more effort we use, the farther away we're getting from self-carriage.
I agree.
Yep. So I think that's clear. Anything you want to add before we
No.
wrap it up on? And I love talking about big picture stuff because, like I said, when we get into the details of how to do this and how to do that, and we're learning new skills, it's so easy for us to lose sight of a simple goal like
Mhm.
self-carriage, even though it's been talked about since 400 BC. It's been talked about forever in classical horse training
Mhm.
of all disciplines. It doesn't matter. We all want that so that we have a very capable dance partner.
Yes. And one who doesn't step on our toes.
Yes, metaphorically or
For
in
real.
actuality. Yeah. Yeah. Good. So I hope you guys found today's topic helpful, some food for thought as we look at riding from the inside out. And thank you for joining us today. Thank you for the likes, the shares, for subscribing, and welcome to all the new subscribers. Thank you very much. And we very much hope that you join us for the next Horse Geeks podcast. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you later.
Bye.